things do look more stable and predictable right now, and so that has given greater optimism.
The question is, does that mean the worst is behind us, or just the real pain has been postponed?
They are going to affect the efficiency of global production, the ability to exploit comparative advantage in trade.
What will happen to globalization?
And we don't allow the whole world to fragment, because nobody will gain from that.
So thank you, Martin. Thank you very much for your time to do this.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Let's start with the world economy. Just this month, the IMF have revised up its forecast of the world economy this year and saying that the world economy is not as bad as we feared 6 months ago. So the question is, does that mean the worst is behind us, or just the real pain has been postponed?
Forecasting is an art at best, certainly not a science. And in a time of such unpredictability, it's even more difficult. But the key point I would make is that the big policy shifts we've been seeing, notably including the rise in protection, changes in macroeconomic policy, these are going to have long-run effects. They are going to affect the efficiency of global production, the ability to exploit comparative advantage in trade, things like that. And we don't know how that is going to play out for a very long time. It's very important. We don't know what will happen to trade policy in the next 12 months. Who knows? We don't know whether the China-US friction now will be resolved. I would guess it will probably be resolved, but it's not certain. There are many future risks, and there are political risks in the US which could affect the world. So I would say we have moved into a world where politics sort of is more important than economics. Politics is unstable. A lot of this is connected with international rivalries of various kinds. And that's a much more unpredictable world than the world of 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or even just 1 year ago, because the second administration of Donald Trump is obviously very considerably different from the first. So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, we will touch upon politics later. Back to the economy. Another area that people now are debating very hard is about what is going on with the U.S. economy. Is it a boom or a bubble? So which camp are you in?
Right now, we would say, if you look at it, it's okay. Now, clearly, one of the things that is supporting it, which has nothing to do with trade policy, is the AI boom. And that has two dimensions, both important, though they are slightly independent. First, it's a gigantic amount of investment. And the companies are making these investments in the hope that they will deliver profits. But the investment keeps the economy going. It's a huge construction boom, right? And the stock market has been very strong. And I've looked at this quite carefully, and that's really all due to the Magnificent Seven, the so-called Magnificent Seven companies. That it's their rise that has basically been supporting the stock market. But that means a lot of stock wealth holders, the richer part of America, who own these stocks, are well off and better off, and they're optimistic, so they spend more. It's not giant, but again, it helps keep the economy going. So for all these reasons, strongly supportive fiscal policy overall, less uncertainty for the reasons I discussed, the AI investment boom and the AI stock market buoyancy, the economy looks rather good at the moment. There's obviously a question, whether the investment in the AI will turn out to be profitable, and whether the stock market expectations of profits implicit in the valuations of the Magnificent Seven will be validated. And that's a very big question. And I must say I'm one of the skeptics.
The total investment on AI globally has exceeded $3 trillion, but the tangible returns we have seen are very limited. So how concerned are you about that?
This is indeed the problem. And I imagine the bulk of that investment is in the US, though presumably China follows. The data center investment seems to be so extraordinary. If that's true, by the way, the only area where the US is really, really investing very heavily. And this is something that has arisen with many, many technological innovations of the past. When a general purpose technology is introduced, it creates huge optimism. It is transformative. It is genuinely transformative. It changes the world, but profits are another matter. That's a completely different matter. And then we saw the same with the dot-com bubble. Very similar. There was a huge investment in telecoms as a result. That big investment were fiber optics, which was a bit like the investment now in data centers. But many of the telecoms companies then went bust. But the fiber optics is very useful. So I tend to separate out the investment in the useful technology of AI from making money out of it. And I think the problem they have, to put it bluntly, is they don't have a business model. There are many future risks, and there are political risks in the US which could affect the world. But profits are another matter. And whether the stock market expectations of profits implicit in the valuations of the Magnificent Seven will be validated. And I must say I'm one of the skeptics.
So what is the implication to the rest of the world if the old global order collapses?
And we don't allow the whole world to fragment, because nobody will gain from that.
You pay close attention to the healthiness, the soundness of the global financial system. The financial crisis functions because there is too much leverage in the system. We see that in the year 2000, we see that in the year 2008. But today, many of the leverage went into the shadow, like private credit area. So we don't know what is happening there.
So your question is absolutely right. I think the conclusion from history is that financial crises occur when a boom, particularly an asset price boom, is backed by leverage, by debt. That's one. And it becomes even more important if the leveraged institutions are banks, because on the liability side of banks is money. There's a lot of private credit. We do know their liabilities are generally not money. They're longer-term debt. That's much easier to handle because there's much less likely to be runs from them. It seems to me that the private equity business is more robust than the sort of leverage financial arrangements we had in 2007 and 8. I'm moderately optimistic. The biggest question to me is the possibility of public sector debt crises, government debt crises. I don't regard that as imminent, but that is a longer-term risk, but it's somewhat distinct from financial crisis.
You mentioned that you worry a lot about the sustainability of the U.S. government debt level, and what will be the catalyst of this sustainability turns into some kind of market correction or meltdown or crisis?
Well, I think I've defined it really. Let's assume this continues for another decade or two. The debt continues to rise. So it's 140, 150% of GDP. And at some point, the household and corporate sector investors don't want to hold all this debt. It is a colossal amount of debt. So the dollar is sold off and interest rates at the long end start to rise significantly.
Yeah.
At this point, the debt dynamics start looking terrible and people just won't buy it anymore. In this world, with inflation becoming a big problem, the central bank committed to funding the government and the government insisting interest rates rise, inflation could become explosive. That will create a recession, very big recession, which will undermine public finances. And so the deficit looks even bigger. And these new higher rates at the short end and the long run, debt becomes massively unsustainable, really unsustainable. And then there's a general flight from the US debt. And given the role of the dollar in the system, this would cause an enormous crisis.
Martin, let's talk something about the politics. The United States now is withdrawing the global order it created and led for many decades. And not because of it's weak, not because of it has to, but because of it wants to, it chooses to. Yeah. So what is the implication to the rest of the world if the old global order collapsed?
Well, it's the biggest question right now. You have to ask two questions, and then you have to consider how you respond. The first question is the most difficult. Is this permanent? Or is it permanent or temporary? Yeah. I mean, you could think these policies are very personal, but the core things here, I think, will not be temporary. The US will not go back to being a liberal international player because, as was shown after Trump 1 ended, that Biden in many ways continued with similar policies. And I think it's very likely the next Democratic president or the next Republican president will also be quite protectionist, populist, and inward-looking because that's the politics of America now. Yeah. Now, assume that it is permanent. Then the rest of the world has to decide how to organize itself. And my view is, so far as it can, it should continue to make global cooperation and the integration of the world system work. And the reasons for that is that it's in their interests. Take China, one of the most important players in this. China seems to me, obviously, to have benefited enormously from the integrated world economy. US is important, but it only accounts for about 13% of world imports. There are all the other countries in Europe and the developing and emerging world which remain important. And so preserving as far as you can open trade, movement of capital is in the interests of all these countries. I hope they will continue to understand that, and China will play a big role in that. And I think that will have implications for China's own policies. Think about climate. Yes, the US is behaving in a very, very irresponsible way, and I think the rest of the world should retaliate against it on climate. But climate remains a very big issue. People, all scientifically literate people, understand that that climate is a very big issue, and so the obvious thing to do is continue with the commitments to lower carbon emissions. It's particularly important that China does, because China is the biggest emitter in the world, and China has the technology. China has an interest in making its technology available, providing finance around the world to ensure that the rest of the world continues to decarbonize. And my view is, in the end, the US will follow, not because they care about climate change, but simply because the new technologies are the most efficient ways to generate and use energy. And so if the rest of the world continues on climate, things will work out, I feel. The issues we confront of cooperation, peace and security, of health, of the environment broadly defined remain, and we must do our best to maintain what was a reasonably cooperative order, which brought immense prosperity and immense challenges, and we don't allow the whole world to fragment, because nobody will gain from that. So far as it can, it should continue to make global cooperation and the integration of the world system work. And the reasons for that is that it's in their interests.
What will happen to globalization?
We will not stop it, because we really can't. What I would like to do at this point is sort of broaden this out to a deeper discussion of what globalization is, and therefore what is threatened here. But I'd start with one simple optimistic point, which is the reason we live in a world of globalization. It is underpinned by extraordinary ongoing technological developments. In other words, our ability to engage in commerce globally in many areas, exchange is orders of magnitude greater than it was a couple of hundred years ago, and certainly than 2,000 years ago, when China and the Roman Empire really didn't know one another at all. But I think we should stress there are reasons we live in a relatively globalized world system, relatively globalized.
Let me put my question in this way. Martin, you're from the United Kingdom. As a European, in today's world, what is the thing you worry about most? And what is the thing you care about most?
The second thing that worries me a great deal, apart from I've talked about already about the environment, global environment, this is a big issue. I think climate is very significant. Is our ability to cooperate to deal with that. That worries me. But more immediately, I'm concerned about maintaining peace. We've had in the last few years 2 very significant wars. Yeah. Fortunately, they were local. I suppose I worry about most, because it's quite personal, about the rise of the radical right across the Western world, because the last time that happened was the 30s, and it ended in World War. I was born immediately after World War II. I know what happened in World War II. My parents were refugees, so I understand the shock. And of course, I understand what World War II meant for Chinese people. So peace is really important, and it should never be taken for granted. And that really, really worries me. So as a European, peace and cooperation and prosperity, these are the obvious things that we need. So we should be able to cooperate for those objectives, because we only have this one home. And we do depend on being able to deal with our problems and with one another in a reasonably sane and rational way, avoiding conflict and breakdown. And the interests here are so powerful that I have to be optimistic that they will be overriding. I think with the US, you just have to deal with them the way they are now behaving and responding to it. So I would take the view the rest of the world can't sort of cooperate and say, we have these demands and this is what you should do. I don't think that's the way it will work. And I think there are a few countries that can play a big role in that, and Europe is a big part of it. That's very crucial. We went through the Cold War.
Yeah.
I lived through the Cold War. There were several times when we nearly blew up the world. I mean, really, really did. It's very dangerous to live in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Also in the early 80s, there was something we discovered later, very close to a nuclear war. So peace is the most important thing we can have, and that rests on cooperation between US and China, being open to one another and Russia, and controlling the use of these weapons. So reintroducing a Cold War type environment where people can't talk to one another, can't deal with one another, very, very dangerous.
Yes. In this messy world, we have just mentioned, we have lost the liberal trading order globally. What will happen to globalization?
That's a big subject. I'd separate out trade in goods, which is where the tariffs are targeted, right, from everything else. Globalization is a much more complicated process than just trade in goods. I think trade in goods will shrink, particularly trade with the US will shrink. But remember, and this is the second big thing I'll go, there's much more to it. I expect that dominance of the dollar to decline. Not necessarily abruptly, though possibly, but I expect the dominance of the dollar to decline, and we will have a much more complicated and messy monetary system. Finally, I stress what I think of as the most important form of globalization of all, which is the globalization of ideas.
Yes.
We share ideas. We are interacting across the world in a way that our ancestors could never do. Now, ideas percolate across borders. We read the same things, even if in translation. We're interacting all the time. So in this fundamental respect, humanity is globalized. As we can see here, interacting with me here in China in a way that was unimaginable 100 years ago.
Yes.
And that will not stop. So in the big scheme of things, there's lots of disruption. There will be less globalization. It will be chaotic, but we will not stop it because we really can't.